Captain secretly pours bottle of wine into orange juice. Over 100 passengers on the plane. Not a single person noticed. The captain skillfully disposed of the bottle. He drank all the orange juice in one gulp. He then went back to the cockpit and fell asleep. Such behavior. The new co-pilot was stunned. The flight attendant, however, was very calm. She said this was not the first time the captain had done this. The flight was very smooth, but just as it was about to land, there was an accident. The plane's elevators malfunctioned. A violent bump caused the passengers to panic. Everyone was terrified. Only the captain, who had just woken up, remained calm. He told the stewardess to tell the passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Then he went to take over the plane. But then he realized that the plane had suddenly lost control. It started to plummet straight down. He hurriedly asked his co-pilot to pull up the ascent lever, but no matter what he tried, he couldn't pull the plane up. The captain called the tower. An emergency was immediately put in place to slow the plane's descent. The captain took off more fuel to reduce the weight of the aircraft. Then he told the co-pilot to lower the landing gear, preparing for an emergency landing. But the plane was falling straight down. It was impossible to make a landing. The plane was still falling fast. The buildings on the ground are clearly visible. The plane is about to crash into a populated area. To avoid the crowds, the captain makes a bold decision. He reversed the direction of the plane. The plane gradually tilted up. You wouldn't believe it. The captain had to fly the plane upside down. With the cooperation of the co-pilot and crew chief, the plane did flip over and managed to stop its descent. But the crisis was not yet complete. Although the plane had stopped its descent, but there was no fuel left to fly to the airport. This was compounded by engine failure. The captain had no choice but to make a crash landing in an open field a short distance away. There was a church in front of us. There was a group of people holding a service. It looked like they were praying for their deaths. It was about to hit the church. The captain tried to swing the plane around, but the wing hit it anyway. What to do now? An inverted aircraft flies through the sky. Both of its engines were malfunctioning. The plane had more than 100 passengers on board. In order to make a safe landing, the captain tried with all his might, but the plane crashed into a church on the ground during the landing. The plane crashed straight into the grass. When the captain woke up again, Jack from the airline told him that 102 people on the plane, 96 of them had survived. It was his bravery on the plane that brought them back from the brink of death. The media made a big deal of it. He was described as a national hero. When he returned home from hospital, the first thing Captain Roy did was to throw out all the alcohol in the house. Although the accident was caused by mechanical failure, but he believed that his drinking was the cause. If he hadn't been drinking, maybe those 6 people wouldn't have died at all. He decided to give up drinking and start a new life for himself. But trouble soon came his way. The lawyer told Roy the hospital had found alcohol in Roy's blood, and that the level was over the limit. Even driving a car would be classified as a DUI, not to mention flying a plane. If it was found that the passenger was killed was caused by the captain's drunken driving, he would have received 150 years in prison. The captain was in a cold sweat. He didn't want to take the blame for that, but then he looked at the wreckage of the plane not far away, and then he pondered. After all, he had been involved in the deaths of 6 people. The lawyer said soothingly he'd done a good job. Actually, if it hadn't been for his heroic actions, more than 6 people would have died. On the other hand, the airline didn't want anything to happen to the captain either, because if he was convicted, the airline would have to pay a huge sum of money. That's when the lawyer suggested just hide the fact that the captain had been drinking, then blame the aircraft manufacturer for the accident. That way, they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First, they had to get rid of the captain's alcohol report. In the face of a huge airline, it's a piece of cake. The lawyer cited the hospital's breathalyzer, that the hospital breathalyzer was too old. The previous test report was ruled invalid. And next, the captain approached the flight attendant and co-pilot, hoping that they would help him hide his drinking, although they didn't want to agree. But after all, it was the captain's brave actions. They survived. Finally, after repeated requests from the captain, they both agreed to cover up for him. Roy thought that was the end of it, but then came the bad news. The investigation team had found 2 empty wine bottles in the wreckage of the plane. What to do now? This captain saved 96 lives, but the flight board wants to put him behind bars. It turns out that in the wreckage of the plane crash, investigators found 2 empty liquor bottles, and this was a short-haul flight. There was no meal service. The only people who had access to the alcohol were the crew, and the finger of blame went straight to the captain. That's when the lawyers suggested one of the flight attendants who was killed also had alcohol detected in her system. As long as he was convinced that the alcohol was consumed by the flight attendant, then the captain could get away with it. He could continue to be a national hero. This was clearly a good idea. The lawyer also specifically warned him, until the hearing in 10 days, he must never touch alcohol again, and Roy obeyed. He hadn't had a drink for 9 days. As long as he made it through the hearing tomorrow, he could continue to be his hero. The night before the hearing, Roy was put up in a nearby hotel, but by the end of the night, Roy didn't know whether it was fear in his heart, or whatever it was. Roy couldn't get to sleep, so he opened the fridge to check. There was nothing but drinks in there. Then he went to the next room. He opened the fridge and saw, oh my goodness, it was full of booze. The lawyer was afraid that he would drink. He had put all the wine in the next next room. Roy picked up one of the bottles, put it to his nose, and sniffed it. Finally, he resisted the urge. He put the wine back. The next day, the lawyer pushed open the door to find the room full of bottles of wine. Roy was nowhere to be found either. Finally, they found Roy in the bathroom. They found Roy in a drunken stupor as the hearing was about to begin. Luckily, they woke the captain up in time. What to do now? The hearing began. The investigation team paid the highest tribute to Roy because they had tried no less than 10 pilots to simulate a forced landing that day, and all of them crashed. This was a testament to the captain's bravery that day. Everyone gave him a round of applause, and this time, the accident was caused by a broken tail fin. All the captain had to do was answer 3 questions. He would have been cleared of suspicion. The investigators asked him if he had been drinking before the accident. The captain answered no. The investigator asked him again if he had been drinking that day. Again, the captain answered no. It was time for the last question. The investigator asked if the 2 empty bottles of alcohol, did the flight attendant drink from them? At this point, if the captain answered yes, he would get off scot-free. He could go on being a heroic captain, but he was silent. Looking at the picture of the stewardess on the screen, his eyes were wet. He couldn't bear to put the blame on the stewardess, because the stewardess was trying to save the boy who was not wearing his seatbelt when she accidentally caused her own death. If he lied now, Roy was afraid he would blame himself for the rest of his life. Roy took a big sip of water and then he found the courage to tell the truth.
Trina Marquez did not drink the vodka because I drank the vodka.
As soon as the words came out, the whole room was in an uproar. Roy was eventually sentenced to life in prison. He would spend the rest of his life in prison, but Roy felt a great sense of relief because the burden was finally off his mind. So here's the question: should you fly a plane if you've been drinking?